Pete Caldwell had been running estate auctions in Breathitt County, Kentucky for 31 years, and he said afterward that he had never seen a room go quiet the way that room went quiet. He had been watching from the back corner near the door, the way he always did when he wasn't on the block, arms crossed, just keeping an eye on the crowd. He said he almost missed it because he'd been watching the wrong person. Most people were. The woman who mattered wasn't the one holding the bid card. She was the one standing beside the locksmith, and she wasn't saying anything at all. Pete told that story for years. He told it the way men tell things they weren't sure they fully understood, carefully, with long pauses, as if the meaning might still be working itself out. This is what he saw. Stories like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, people who kept things in notebooks and bottom drawers and old safes in back bedrooms, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. Margaret Stivers was 64 years old in the spring of 2018 and had been a widow for 7 months. Her husband, Clarence, had died the previous October of a heart event that the doctors said was fast and, in their word, merciful, which is the kind of word doctors use when they mean that the person didn't have time to be afraid. He had been a quiet man, a retired equipment mechanic who had worked 30 years at a John Deere dealership in Jackson and spent his weekends in the shop behind their house in the Frozen Creek community, doing small engine work for neighbors who paid him mostly in produce and occasionally in cash. They had been married 41 years. They did not have children. The estate sale was not Margaret's idea. It was her sister-in-law, Brenda's idea, and Brenda was the kind of woman who had ideas about things that weren't entirely her concern. Clarence's shop tools were going, the equipment was going, the truck was going. Margaret had agreed to most of it. She needed the money in a practical sense, and she understood that. What she did not need was the safe. The safe had been in the back of the bedroom closet for as long as Margaret could remember. It was a Diebold floor model, smaller than it sounded, about the size of a milk crate, painted a dark institutional gray that had gone to rust at the corners and along the bottom seam. Clarence had never told her the combination. She had never asked. It was one of those things in a long marriage that sits in the background without ever becoming urgent. And then one October it became urgent all at once, and by then it was too late to ask. Brenda had called a locksmith in Hazard, who quoted $300 to open it and said he couldn't guarantee the interior condition after. Brenda said that was too much to spend on something that was probably empty. She put it in the auction catalog. Margaret did not argue. The sale was held at the house on the second Saturday of May 2018, cold morning, clear sky, the kind of spring day in the mountains that feels borrowed from October. Pete Caldwell ran it, same as he'd run the last 4 estate sales in that hollow. About 60 people came through. The tools went fast. Clarence had kept good tools and people in that community knew it. The truck went to a man from Hayden who paid cash and drove it away before noon. The safe was lot 38. Pete called it near the end of the equipment line, after the shop vac and the air compressor, and before a set of socket wrenches in a metal tray. He described it honestly. Diebold floor safe, combination unknown, sold as is, buyer responsible for removal. Started at $25. A man near the front offered $25. A second man went to $35. There was some low laughter, the usual kind. The safe is yard ornament variety, the joke that makes itself at these things. A woman, Margaret, didn't recognize bid 45 and then stopped. The first man went to 55. Margaret raised her card at 60. She was standing at the back of the crowd in a gray wool coat she had owned since the 1990s. She was not a dramatic-looking woman. She had not planned to bid. She had told herself on the drive over that morning that she would not bid, that Brenda was probably right. that it was probably empty. She told herself that for the length of the drive, which was 4 miles. Then, she watched a man she didn't know offer $55 for the last thing in the house that still held something of Clarence she hadn't gotten to yet, and she raised her card. The first man went to 65. Margaret went to 75. He shook his head. Somebody made a remark she didn't quite hear. Pete called it sold. She paid cash from her coat pocket. She was not sure, she said later, what she had thought she was doing. She didn't know the combination. She didn't have $300 to spend on a locksmith. She had bought a rusted box she couldn't open for $75 she probably shouldn't have spent, and she was going to have to figure out the rest later. She had a neighbor with a truck take it to the house and put it in the living room because it was too heavy to move to the bedroom. It sat there for 3 weeks. What Margaret knew about Clarence Stivers could fill a ledger, and what she didn't know about him could fill another one, the same size. 41 years does that. You learn the shape of a person so thoroughly that you stop noticing the details. The way you stop noticing the sound of a clock that has been running in the same room for decades. Then, the clock stops, and the silence is the loudest thing you've ever heard. She knew he had been careful with things, not secretive. Careful. He kept his tools in order and his paperwork in folders and his finances in a ledger he updated every Sunday evening at the kitchen table with a ballpoint pen. She had never had cause to look at the ledger closely because he managed the money and she managed the house, and that had been the arrangement, and it had worked fine for 41 years. After he died, she found the ledger and went through it. Everything was in order. Everything was accounted for. There was a line, repeated at irregular intervals going back about 15 years, that said only safe deposit, MISC. The amounts varied. $40, $60, once $210. No further description. She had assumed when she found those entries that he meant the safe deposit box at the bank in Jackson, which she had already opened and inventoried. It held their deeds, their insurance policies, their car titles, and a small amount in savings bonds. It occurred to her, in the 3rd week of the Diebold floor safe sitting in her living room, that the bank box and the bedroom closet were 2 different places. The locksmith's name was Gary Engel, out of Hazard. Same one Brenda had called. Came on a Thursday morning. He was a compact man in his 50s with a case of tools and a manner that was businesslike without being unfriendly. He looked at the safe for a moment, asked a few questions about the manufacture date, checked the dial, and said he thought he could work it rather than drill it. Might take a while. Margaret made coffee and sat in the kitchen. He called her back in after 40 minutes. He was standing beside the safe with the door open and his hands at his sides, and an expression on his face that was not quite readable. He said, "Mrs. Stivers, you may want to sit down." She sat. Inside the Diebold floor's safe, arranged with the same quiet care that Clarence Stivers had applied to every other thing in his life, a metal cash box, unlocked, holding $4,840 in cash. Mixed bills, mostly 20s and 50s, some older. Counted twice by Gary Engel before she arrived, who said he'd counted it because he wanted to be sure of the number before he said it out loud. A coin collection in a flat presentation case, Morgan dollars, peace dollars, a small run of Walking Liberty halves, a few pre-1933 gold pieces. Gary Engel was not a coin man, but he knew enough to know what he was looking at. He did not venture a number. A spiral notebook, the kind with a black and white marbled cover, filled in Clarence's handwriting. Not a diary, more of a log, dates, amounts, descriptions. 15 years of entries corresponding to those safe deposit, MISC, lines in the ledger, each one now explained. The $40 entries were coin purchases, individual pieces, noted by type and year. The larger ones were cash savings, pulled and stored in what Clarence had apparently considered a more reliable location than any institution. And at the back of the notebook, in the last few pages, written in the same even hand, a letter. 3 pages. Addressed to Margaret. She did not read it in front of Gary Engel. She thanked him, paid him his $300 in cash from the box in the safe, and asked him to see himself out. She sat in the living room with the letter for a long time before she opened it. She has not said to anyone who has been told this story exactly what was in the letter. That is hers. What she has said is that it was not surprising, in the sense that it did not tell her anything about Clarence she had not already known. It was more like hearing a voice she had been missing say the things it had always meant to say, and had simply never gotten around to saying in time. He had been setting money aside since 2003, a little at a time, the way a man who grew up with nothing sets money aside. Quietly, without talking about it, without making it into a thing. Just putting a small amount away on the principle that someday there might be a need for it, and it was better to have it than not. The cash in the box was $4,840. The coin collection, once she had it properly appraised by a dealer in Lexington that a neighbor's son recommended, came to $16,200. The pre-1933 gold pieces accounted for most of that. 2 of the Morgan dollars were key dates. Margaret Stivers paid off the remainder of the property tax lien that had been worrying her since January. She had the furnace in the house serviced. She bought a used Buick LeSabre with 112,000 miles on it that the mechanics said had been well maintained, which she paid for in cash. She kept the safe. It's in the bedroom now, where she can see it from the door. She doesn't keep anything in it. The combination is written on a piece of tape on the inside of the door, in her own handwriting, so that whoever has to deal with things when the time comes will not have to wait 3 weeks and spend $300 to find out it's empty. Pete Caldwell told the story for years, as has been said. He told it the way men tell things they didn't entirely understand. What he had seen, he said, was a woman in a gray coat standing at the back of a crowd bidding $75 for something everybody else had already decided wasn't worth their trouble. He said he didn't know why she did it. He said he thought maybe she just wasn't finished yet. He was right about that. She wasn't. There are things a person keeps that no one else knows the value of. Sometimes they keep them in a ledger. Sometimes they keep them in a notebook in a rusted safe in the back of a closet. And they mean to explain them eventually. And time runs short the way it does. What's left behind isn't always what you can see. Sometimes it's in a box that hasn't been opened yet. Sometimes the only person who knows to look is the one who paid $75 for the right to find out. Margaret Stivers knew to look. That's the whole of it.